I would like my research to have a clear impact in terms of improving the quality of applied comics that I see in the world. My name is Ian Horton and I'm a reader in graphic communication here at London College of Communication. My research goes across two main areas, and the first of these is graphic design, which includes typography and particularly information design. And the other area of research is comics studies, but that also includes areas such as illustration and also caricature. So one current project that I'm working on is looking at comics as design and considering how comics are not only stories and narratives and images, but they're also products of magazine production, and they should be considered in the same way as that by thinking about such elements as typography and all of those other paratextual elements outside of the narrative that also affect the reader in some kind of way. I suppose my most significant research in graphic design is a book about the Dutch graphic design group called Hardworkin, which was a study that took over 3 years, involved interviews with all of the members of the group, and also the commissioning of additional experts to write inserts into the book as well. This was primarily based in archival research that was done at the Stadsarchief in Rotterdam, and we put over 3,000 images into the final book. So in some ways it acts as almost like a catalogue resume. So as well as telling the history of this graphic design group, it also gives a very rich visual history of the group as well. One of my most recent projects in terms of comic studies is 2 books on violence in comics. There's volume 1, which is called Context of Violence in Comics, and that's probably the one that tries to have an impact not just within comics, but also thinking about the wider media landscape and how we think of violence in society in more general kind of terms. The second volume is called Representing Acts of Violence in Comics, and that's much more comics focused, and it looks at the visual languages that are used within comics, the kind of stories that are told and the narratives that are told. They were both edited volumes with many individual contributors, academics here, within the University of the Arts, and also PhD students who have now completed their studies. Almost exactly a year ago, we set up the Comics Research Hub. Even though it's based here, it involves academics from across the whole university. We now have an identity because we have core, so we've all been researching in this field for a very, very long time, but now we've got a university and college identity and are now becoming known for that kind of activity. Since we set up the Comics Research Hub in 2018, we have run 6 symposia and events based around comics. 2 of those projects were based within the archives that we have here. Because of the archival holdings and the archives and special collections, I've put forward residencies to invite different artists and researchers to come into the archive and work for a year on a body of work. So we had 2 researchers last year. John Myers, who was looking at aspects of graphic medicine. He ran a 2-day symposium with invited speakers, but it also included workshops. The other project was in the archive was run by Will Grady. His PhD research was the Western and how the Western reflected more contemporary concerns and interests. His research was writing some papers around that, which are currently in publication, but he also organised a conference, a 1-day conference, around the idea of transnationalism in comics. And this is essentially the idea that comics circulate and mean different things in different cultural contexts. We have quite a number of students now who are starting to work in that space in between theoretical understanding and practical kind of outcomes. And this opens up some really interesting kind of debates, because there are some students, particularly with graphic design, where it's quite difficult to get the sense that practice-based research is of value. And so that's been quite a struggle, I think, for 3 of my PhD students, is to gradually start off thinking, oh, I'm actually writing a theoretical PhD. oh, I'm using practice, so it's probably a bit practice-led as well. And then ultimately for their final submission, taking the plunge in some ways and saying, well, actually, the things I've been making here have value of their own, so I'm going to then put those forward as significant outcomes from my research.